Welcome back to the North Tonawanda Football Hall of Fame YouTube channel. My name is Ed Helensky. Glad you could join me today. Got another great guest here. One of the top radio play-by-play announcers in the world, the voice of the Atlanta Falcons and Carolina Panthers, Westwood One, ESPN Radio, and now he does some work for the PGA from his home in Charlotte, North Carolina, the one and the only Bill Rosinski. Bill, pleasure to have you. Very nice to meet you. We've never met before. It's quite the honor.
Well, thank you, Ed. Yeah, it's been a great ride for me. Still working. You might see the name Jane. My wife does a lot more Zooms than I do, so that's why it says Jane at the bottom of the screen. But other than that, it's great to be with you. And I've seen some of your videos, and thinking back to those days at Gibbons has been a lot of fun for me.
That's what I want to talk to you about. Is you're a kid from Fletcher Street in Tonawanda. And instead of going to Tonawanda or maybe Cardinal O'Hara, you end up across the canal at Bishop Gibbons. How did something like that happen?
Well, I went to grammar school at St. Francis in Tonawanda. So there was that whole Catholic upbringing. And you're right, I lived on Fletcher Street. In fact, Tonawanda High School was probably an 8-block walk from where I was, right near 2 Mile Creek, where my folks had a home. And but they wanted me to go to a Catholic high school. And at the time where we were, it was Gibbons. We didn't go to O'Hara. The kids who were in our neighborhood didn't go to O'Hara. They went to Gibbons. So, and that was tough, because there were not a lot of us. Joe Berngas was another guy, one of my best friends, and still is today. Joe lived on Niagara Street, and we'd always ride the bus together. And there wouldn't be a lot of people on the bus, but we ended up at Gibbons. And most of the guys there, our classmates were NT kids. So there was that Tonawanda, North Tonawanda rivalry, but we got to be friends, and I had 4 wonderful years in high school.
Talk about your Gibbons years as well, too. It's from the academic standpoint to also to the athletic standpoint.
Oh, you want to start with academics, huh? You're getting nasty right at the start of the...
It could be a brief conversation, too,
No, we took these college prep courses, and I'd sit in Latin class going, why am I doing this? How is this going to help me call a fly ball to left field or whatever I was going to do for a living? But I enjoyed the teachers there. Father Shoy was the principal, and there were a number of Father Bianco, Father Corradetti. I can think back to the teachers, and then we had lay teachers as well. Mr. Sillick, who sadly has passed away. A guy named Colin McQueen. Father Kemp, I remember him. We used to have these. We had these sex ed classes, and it was taught by a lay couple. And then the father would come in and go, I don't care what they said, but it's all wrong. So it was, it was, we had great teachers, and the nuns were strict. The nuns, I think, were tougher than the priests. And, but those were the kind of the names I remember. And it was, I knew when I went to high school what I wanted to do for a living, and that was be a broadcaster. I didn't know if it was going to be football, baseball, basketball, hockey. I had no clue, but that was the intent as I got ready to get to go to college. I wasn't the greatest student in the world. I think I got C's and B's, and my senior year was probably my best year in school. I did very well in grades. I had great seasons playing football and baseball, and I think I won some award at our awards banquet at the end of the season. And so I guess if you're going to go through 4 years of school and your senior year is your best, that's pretty good.
You played for Chuck Ramsey in football. You were a left tackle. Your senior year, you were named All-Western New York by the Courier Express and the Buffalo News. Did you have any aspirations that you were going to play Division III or Division II or Division I football at that point, or you were just going to go on and concentrate on a broadcasting major?
My senior year, I had thoughts that, maybe I can do this at the next level. And actually, I was thinking more baseball than football, because I pitched and I played first base. I was a decent hitter, pretty good pitcher. And I thought baseball might be more my cup of tea than football would be. So I ended up going to Marietta College in Ohio because I was looking for, I wanted to go to a small school. I didn't want to stay at home and go to school. I wanted to go to a bigger school. Marietta, to this day, still has an incredible baseball team. If you look up Division III, World Series, and over the years, Marietta College for some 40, 50 years has been very, very good. And they put a handful of guys in the major leagues. So I actually went to Marietta. My freshman year, I was going out for the football team. I was there in August and working at left tackle, but my heart wasn't in it. I just thought to myself, I'm not going to be a pro at this. And then I kept looking at the press box up at the football stadium during practice, and I'm thinking to myself, that's where I want to be instead of down here. I also went out for the baseball team, but I mean, I was okay. Those guys were beyond my level. And I will tell you one baseball story, because we played my senior year against a kid by the name of Kevin Coble. Coble, I think, pitched for St. Francis. And he eventually made it to the major leagues. And I think our season opener was at Gibbons against them. And he just had control problems. We ended up winning the game. And I hit a home run against the guy that took his place in the lineup. But I remember batting against Kevin Coble, and I'm standing there. He was a left-hander. And he wound up and threw a pitch. And all I did was hear the glove. I never saw the ball. I just heard the ball hit the catcher's mitt. I'm going, oh, man. He ended up walking me because he was wild that day. So I think even at that point, my senior year, I go, I don't think baseball is going to be anything in my future as well. But to answer your question, I'd thought about it, but in the end, I really knew that I wanted to pursue in college, just get better at what I wanted to do for a living.
You also, football-wise, you played for Chuck Ramsey. What do you recall of Coach Ramsey from those days?
Well, it was like a two-man. It was Chuck Ramsey and Dick Winters. And Dick Winters was I spent more time with Dick because he was the line coach. Chuck was always with the quote unquote skilled guys, the Tony Sukenniks, the Tylecks, and these guys who, were receivers, running backs. And Dick was a Tonawanda police officer for a long time. So between the two of them, I mean, those two guys were great coaches. And Chuck was a really good leader. He kind of let Dick do the yelling and screaming. It was like, the good cop, bad cop. So Dick was always the harder ass on a lot of us. Like when we would go to warm up and do calisthenics and jumping jacks and all and grass drills, he would be the guy running it. And then Chuck would come out and blow the whistle and we'd start practicing. So, and Dick Winters, by the way, was also, I knew Dick because he coached Little League in Tonawanda. And he was one of my coaches growing up. I think when I was 11 and 12, Dick was my coach, and his sons, Mark and Scotty, were both on the team. So I got to know the family a little bit. So I was closer with Dick more than I were with Chuck. But Chuck was as I said, a fantastic coach, a great leader. And I will tell you one story. My senior year, I had never played organized football until I got to high school. So my freshman year was tough. I mean, I remember one time my dad picked me up after practice and I was almost in tears. I go, I don't know if I can, I'm getting beat up. Coaches are yelling at me because that was my freshman year. Joe Hurtubise and Paul Camara were the JV coaches. And of course, Joe was the brother of the race car driver, Jim. But those were the two guys that coached us at the JV level. And I remember telling my dad, geez, I just don't know if I want to do this. And my dad had played football. He played semi-pro. And he said, well, look, if you don't want to play, that's fine. But, give it another couple of weeks. So I hung in there and it turned out great. So my first 2 years, I played JV. And then my junior and senior year, I played varsity. And by my senior year, I was a starter at defensive end and left tackle. And so here we are, we're playing a road game. Now that season we had opened up against Walsh and lost, and we were not ready. We just, if we'd have played Walsh at the end of the season, it might've been a different story because we were a really good football team at the end of that season, 1970. And we were on the road playing somebody. It was like game 5 or 6. So I wasn't doing very well and I knew it at left tackle offensively. So we get in the locker room, it's halftime. And like I said, normally Dick Winters is the guy yelling and screaming. So the coaches walk in, we're sitting there, And Chuck Ramsey walks in and he goes, Rosinski. And I look up at him and go, yeah, coach. He goes, you stink. And he ripped me for 12 minutes. I don't know how long halftime was, 15. So the 12 we were in the locker room, he was just ripping me for just playing a horrible game, not trying, you're just awful. So, that got me jacked up. And I went out in the second half and I did play much better. We ended up winning the game. I think we shut them out. And then I remember we got on the bus to drive back to Gibbons, and Ramsey's on the bus and he goes, Rosinski. And I go, yeah, coach, that was a great second half. And all the players cheered. So that was pretty cool. But he was, and I'm lucky enough that I came back for one of the reunions a couple of years ago, and Chuck was there, and I had a chance to talk with him a little bit, and it was good to see him again. But a wonderful leader of men, and he knew he didn't have to do the dirty work because Dick Winters would.
Were you guys back then that especially your senior season? Were you guys your football team close knit?
Yeah, I mean, you're only talking 20-some guys, and most of us had to play both ways. So, yeah, I think we were really close. Bill Vanderwater was a really good friend of mine. Bill played in the offensive line, played tight end. Dave Bielski, Phil Belzak. I mean, all these guys, the lineman, John Batt. John Batt was a really good player. I think John was a junior that year. And so it was. And John Krantz was a cool guy. I think he played linebacker. He might have been one of our running backs. I remember running into John maybe 10 years later. He was I think he was working in the stock market. He was a banker in New York City, and I was in New York at the time. I ran into him at a Rangers game, and it was just great to see him. So yeah, we were, and we didn't, living in Tonawanda, it was much harder for me to hang around with the guys during the week. Especially when we had school and then practice. So, I really didn't see him, but on weekends, and we had parties and stuff. And so, yeah, I would say we were a really close-knit group of guys.
I want to fast forward to the basketball season. I know you didn't play basketball, but you hooked up with a character named Tony Sukennik, and you guys were calling basketball games, the Gibbons game, during that season as well, too. Something to practice with, and did you have to bring Tony along for the ride?
No, Tony was very happy. I didn't have to bring Tony. I told him what my plan was. I said, because here I am my senior year, and I'm already into, I remember my dad, when I was a little kid, brought home a reel-to-reel tape recorder, and I would pretend I was announcing. Van Miller was my hero. Van Miller was the reason I got into this, because I would listen to Bills games on Sunday, because, back in those days, in the 60s, those home games were blacked out. Unless you were at the game, you didn't see the home game. So I would listen to Van, and I'm going, he's having fun. That's what I want to do. So I said, I told Tony, I said, I think I'm going to practice. I'm going to try and do a game, because we had the stage on one side. I said, I can set up a table on the stage and just do play-by-play, call the game. He says, let me be your color guy. So we only did this a couple of times, but it was really cool. And we lined up, like Tony did a pregame interview with the Joe Corey, who was the head basketball coach. I forgot what school it was, but Joe did like a pregame interview with Tony. I mean, this is going nowhere. This is going on a tape recorder. So he did that. I remember we had Hank Lewis, who was our athletic director. We had him on as a halftime guest. And Hank was going off about something. It's a good thing I don't have that tape anymore. It wasn't politically correct. So it was a lot of fun, to go back and listen to those games. And the basketball team, I think our basketball team that year had like 7 guys on it. And they played their hearts out, but they were and Bob Ivory was their coach. And, we would go to the games and cheer them on, but it was tough for those guys because they only had 7 guys. They weren't real tall. But it was fun.
I want to talk to you about February of 1971. The announcement came out that Gibbons was closing. What was the reaction and the feeling back then of the students and the teachers and the nuns and the priests of the school?
I think there was some shock and realization. If you're a senior like I was, you thought, wow, boy, I'm glad I got my 4 years here, because after that, you were going to go to NT or O'Hara to finish your schooling. But for me, I think there was a lot of disappointment, a lot of sadness that school wouldn't be there. And then just think that you're, an alumni. I've always enjoyed, like my sons went to They both went to, well, one went to high school here and the other went to high school in Atlanta. But, you know, they would go back and see their coaches and teachers, and they would go back for games and just, you know, you can't do that now. I mean, when I drive by Gibbons, if I'm ever back in Buffalo, and it's a senior home now. Now, maybe eventually I end up there again, but it's just so sad that it had to happen. But we had 99 kids, I think, in our graduating class my senior year. And how do you function, you know, with the expenses of the building and paying the teachers and just the athletics and all that? I kind of understood what was going on, but it was just really sad.
You didn't have a baseball coach for a while either, and then Don Colpois was hired. And your history with him started there, but it goes a little farther along. What do you recall about Coach Colpois as your baseball coach?
I learned more from Don Colpois from, I guess, February, March through April and May. I learned more baseball from him than I ever had in my life. He was an incredible coach. And I remember when he took over, our first practice, we were inside, we were in the gym. And he goes, okay, you guys, let's see what kind of shape you're in. And we started running sprint. And it was the first time I'd ever seen stars in my eyes and thought I was going to black out because he was grinding us. And we were all huffing and puffing. And he finally stopped it and he says, you know, you guys are not in shape. I'm going to have to get you in shape. And he did. But he knew more baseball strategy. He was incredible. I like I said, and I felt sorry for him at the end because we had a good team. And we ended up going to the playoffs. And sadly, our first playoff game, I think it was single elimination. Our first playoff game was the day after the prom. There were guys coming to the high school locker room still in their tuxedos to change into their baseball uniforms. And I could tell by the look on his face that, you know, and I think I was out till like 2 or 3 in the morning. So here we had this game, it was like at 10 o'clock or 11, something like that. And he had a lot of confidence, I think, still that we were going to advance. And we got beat that day. We just didn't have it. But like I said, he was, let me tell you one story about Colpois. We're playing St. Francis, and this involves Kevin Coble again. So I think the game, we're up by a run. And there's runners at first and third for St. Francis of Athol Springs, first and third. There's one out, and they bring Tony. Tony did some relief pitching, Sukennik. So they bring Tony in. So first and third, one out. The game is tied, I think. Let's put it that way. Yeah, I think the game was tied. So Kevin Coble comes up, lines a base hit to left. So the guy on third scores, and we're thinking the game's over. So the guy who was on second, he had rounded third, and he's jumping up and down. They won the game. And all of a sudden, Colpois comes running out. He says, tag the runner. So the guy who was dancing around had passed third. They tag him, and he goes, now throw to first, because Coble, who got the hit, was standing at second base. So I'm still standing at first base. They throw the ball over there. I touch first, and the umpire goes out. Coble had missed first base. And the only two people to see it were Colpois and the umpire. So we get a double play. The run doesn't count. We end up going extra innings. We ended up beating them. So that's my Don Colpois story. And then to add, you said I had other, when I came back to Buffalo to work for 1 year at WEBR, the Bisons were a AA team, and we did some of their games, and Don was the GM. And I actually talked to him a couple of times. We had lunch, and I ended up doing some PA for him. I was like the PA announcer at Bison games during the week because we didn't do weekend games. We just did the weekend games at WEBR. So, but Don Colpois was a blessing as far as baseball was concerned.
At Marietta College, you majored in broadcasting. You did a little sports as well too. I think I've read someplace that one game that you broadcast from the top of your car.
It was actually and this was after I graduated, because I had 4 years at Marietta, and Marietta was great because as a freshman, I could be on the student radio station. I was doing JV basketball on television. So everything, and I was really finding out my first couple of years at Marietta, okay, are you any good at what you think you can have as a career? And it turned out, thankfully, I was. And then I stayed to work in Marietta. My first job, I actually came back to Buffalo after I graduated, and I went to BEN, I went to GR, I went to some of the other stations, and I said, hey, baby, here I am. And they all looked at me like going, who the hell are you? I said, well, I grew up here. I'm going to be a good announcer. Well, I'll go somewhere and get some experience. So I went back to Marietta and did high school sports, college sports. And this is back in the day, small town radio, where if you could sell it, you did it. And we had to do some kind of lacrosse. It was club lacrosse, Marietta College club lacrosse. And my boss, the GM, says, Bill, you got to call this game. I'd never called lacrosse before. And there was nowhere to set up. So we had a station, the radio station had a station wagon. So we parked it next to the field, and that was on the roof. And I was broadcasting the game. It's amazing what you'll do to make a buck in small town radio.
You worked for UPI Radio.
Mm-hmm.
What were some of the sports that you were doing at that point with UPI Radio, and how did you transition to getting your job with the Atlanta Falcons?
Okay, well, I'll try to make this as quick as I can. But so I worked in Marietta, Ohio, and I eventually was the morning guy, the sports director, a salesman. And trust me, in small town radio, the people who make the most money are salespeople, not the morning hosts, not the afternoon hosts. It's the salespeople. And I got married at that time, and but then I really didn't like sales, so I went to Alliance, Ohio, which is about 20 minutes from Canton. And I was a sports director for the radio station there. I did high school, again, college, Division III. And then in 1980, that station decided they were dumping sports. So that's when I found out that WEBR in Buffalo was hiring. I was going to be like the second guy. Greg Lucas was the sports director. And Don Colpoys helped me get that job because they were doing the Bisons. And I contacted Don and I said, hey, look, if you can put in a good word for me. And he did. And I did get the job. And that was just covering stuff. I mean, we covered the Bills, the Sabres, which was really cool. Didn't pay a lot of money because it was a publicly owned radio station at the time. Probably still is. I don't know. So I did that for a year. And then I answered a blind ad in Broadcasting Magazine that there was a network in New York City looking for a sportscaster reporter. I applied for the job, had no idea who it was for, forgot about it. And then 5 weeks later, I get a call from UPI Radio in New York. Mike Alabaugh was the guy's name. He said, can you come in for an interview? So I did. I flew in. And that job at UPI, I didn't do any play-by-play, but we did sportscasts and we covered big events. It was my first time ever traveling to major golf tournaments, the Masters, PGA Championship. I covered the Super Bowl. I covered the World Series. And I got to know all the other broadcasting people at NBC, Mutual, which is now Westwood One, ABC. I got to know all the people there. So that I was only there, I was with UPI, worked at 42nd and 2nd. We were in the Daily News building. And it was like, wow, I'm coming into Midtown Manhattan every day to work. And anytime there was a big press conference about anything, it was always in New York City. It was really cool, but it was all just covering stuff and reporting. I enjoyed it, but I wanted to get back into play-by-play. UPI moved us from New York to DC, and they ran into a lot of financial trouble. And in 1985, I found out the Mutual Broadcasting System, which was based in Crystal City, Virginia, right outside Arlington, was looking for a weekend sportscaster. And I knew some people through my travels with UPI at then Mutual. And I thought to myself, if I can get in there, they do a lot of play-by-play. They did NFL games. They did college basketball. They did college football. They were the voice of Notre Dame. So I ended up getting the job in February of 85. And then it took a while till 1988 when they finally gave me a chance to do games. First game I did a college football game, Boston College hosting Penn State. And it went well. And my boss said, you're doing a pretty good job. So the next year I was doing NFL games, college, I would do college basketball. So that's where I got into doing what I'm still doing. And in 1992, I found out, and my big dream was to work for a team because again, remember, Van Miller's my hero. So Van's the voice of the Bills. How cool would it be to be the voice of a football team? So I found out the Falcons were looking for somebody. This is 92, February, March. Sent in a tape, resume, and they did call me. I went down in June for an interview. First year of the Georgia Dome, 1992. Now the Georgia Dome's gone, but it was the first year of the Georgia Dome, and they wanted a new play-by-play guy, and I got it. I got the job. I interviewed with the Smith family, Tommy Nobis, and I spent 3 years in Atlanta. So that's how I ended up there, and it was wonderful. I mean, the team wasn't very good, but Jerry Glanville was the coach, and he was such a piece of work. But I got to be really friendly with him. He'd be leaving tickets for Elvis. He drove on the Busch circuit in NASCAR. I mean, this guy was, and he was a good coach for a while. He could turn a team around, but then to get to that next level, for some reason, it just wouldn't happen. So that's how I ended up in Atlanta.
The contract expired, and you lost the rights, and you found yourself out of work there. And then you moved over to the Carolina Panthers, where you had spent a good 10 years there as well, too, as the radio play-by-play voice of the Panthers. How was that experience? And better yet, let me just ask this question. You ever pinch yourself at that point and say, wow, look at me, a kid from Tonawanda doing all this stuff?
Ed, I'll be honest with you, I pinch myself all the time. Being able to do this at the level I've been at for the last since I got to Mutual, and the Panther thing. Actually, Atlanta wanted me to stay, but they changed radio stations, and I was going to take a big pay cut. And a friend of mine was setting up the Panther radio network. This was their first year; they were an expansion team. So he said, "You should interview for this job." So I went up and did, and the first GM of the team was Bill Polian. And Polian found out I was from Buffalo. So that was great. And I interviewed with Bill. Mike McCormick was the team president, and sat in with him. I sat in with ownership, one of the Richardson sons, and got the job. And Ed, watching a team from the beginning, that first training camp, they had training camp and still do in Spartanburg, South Carolina. It's about an hour and a half. I live here in Charlotte. And, there were 90 guys. And, Don Beebe was on that team, former Buffalo Bill. So, there were some familiar faces along with Polian that, helped me along the way, getting there and getting to know the team and the players and all that. And for 10 years, I did it. And our second year, 96, we went to the NFC Championship game and lost to the Packers in Green Bay. That's the year Favre ended up winning that game, and they went on to win the Super Bowl that year. And then we changed coaches. I was there 10 years. Dom Capers fired after 4 years. George Seifert came in. George was an interesting guy. Had 2 Super Bowl wins with the Niners, but it just didn't work out. His last year, we were 1-15. We won the first game and lost the next 15. And then he got fired, and John Fox came in. And 2 years later, we're in the Super Bowl. So here I am. And I still tell people to this day in my career, some of the great things I've been able to broadcast on radio, and it's still numero uno, is the Super Bowl. It was Super Bowl 38 against New England in Houston. Came down to a typical, Vinatieri field goal with no time left on the clock, but it was a great game. And still, Falcons for 3, Panthers for 10. And I still pinch myself at where I am.
When the Panthers played the Bills, did you ever have a conversation or a little chat with Van Miller and tell him your feelings about him?
You got it. Yes. One of the segments that, and the Panthers still do this, is called the visiting voice. So every team we play, they line up for the play-by-play guy to come in the visiting, our booth, the Panther booth, and just talk about the team. So we played the Bills a few times. In fact, in 95, our second game, and I go back to those Buffalo connections. Remember, the first quarterback for Carolina was Frank Reich. The first touchdown ever in Panther history was in Atlanta. Frank Reich to Pete Metzelaars. So, here's this whole Buffalo connection with Polian and all these other coaches. And I did. Van came in. Van knew how much I admired him. And he knew, God rest him, rest his soul. He knew how much he meant to me. And he became a friend. We didn't talk all that much, but every time we played him, we would chat. And he knew that he was one of the big reasons I decided to get into broadcasting.
Great story with that. After the Panthers, you moved on to, correct me if I'm wrong, but you moved on to ESPN Radio.
All right. Well, first, before ESPN, I went back to Westwood One. The Panthers and I had a falling out after 10 years. And I was actually without a job. I didn't do a whole heck of a lot in, I was collecting unemployment for a while. This is 2005. Eventually started doing a talk show in Charlotte. So that started paying the bills. And then at the end of 2005, Westwood One contacted me and said, hey, we've got a chance. Can you do a game for us this weekend? And so I did. I actually worked with Bob Trumpy. And ironically, it was Dallas at Carolina. So it was a home game for me, and I was back in the Panther Stadium. And then Westwood the next year had a little changing of the guard in the front office, and a gentleman named Howard Deneroff, who is still with Westwood. I contacted Howie and I said, hey, look, if you could use me this year, please do. And he got back to me within a week, and I did full seasons, NFL, some college, and hoops. But I worked with Dan Reeves for 3 years on the Sunday afternoon broadcast with Westwood One. So I did that. And then 2009 was an interesting year for me because my contract was up with Westwood, but a buddy of mine who was one of the original hires at ESPN Radio, and he hired all their play-by-play talent. And I'd gotten to know him this goes back to New York, UPI. He was with another radio network, and we were friends then. So he contacted me and said, hey, how would you like to be the voice of college football for ESPN Radio? I'm going, and I'm going, Disney, the pay was better, the insurance and stocks and all this other stuff. So I took the job. I ended up going to ESPN Radio. I was there for 10 years. And a lot happened during that 10 to not only do college football, which I was their voice for 10 years, but they started doing NFL games. So I did that. They did some golf, and it was a good run there. He retired, and as you might expect, when your boss retires and there's a changing of the guard, the new guy said, I want somebody else in here. So they let me go in 2019, but it was 10 great years. And it was in 2009, I mentioned 2009 because my agent called me and he said, hey, have you ever thought about doing golf on the radio? I'm going, what? And I knew they did play-by-play. I didn't pay a lot of attention to it. So I interviewed for a play-by-play spot for PGA Tour Radio. And I got the job. And I've been calling golf since 2009. This past week, I did the Wells Fargo Championship. That's a home game for me here in Charlotte. I'll be at Kiowa next week, PGA Championship. I've gotten to know, I've called so many of Rory McIlroy shots over the years. I've got my interviews with him, pictures with him. He knows who I am. He knows my name. It's not like we're bosom buddies, but I know all these guys because you're in close contact with them. So golf's been great. I covered five or six British Opens. In fact, this is a long answer, but I would tell you that I mentioned the Super Bowl being that's still number one on my list, that I did the Super Bowl. But the next two are golf. I was at the Open Championship with Stenson and Mickelson. It was 2016. When they had this epic duel on Sunday. They were the only two guys who could win the golf tournament. And I had followed both of them on Saturday, and we had another guy on course, so we kind of split it up. I took Phil, he took Henrik on Sunday. And it was the most riveting golf I've ever seen. And then the year before that, I'm walking the old course at St. Andrews. I'm walking with Jason Day and Jordan Spieth. It was a Monday finish because of weather. And here I'm following these guys for 18 holes. And I thought Spieth was going to win his third major that year, 2015. He had won the Masters and U.S. Open. So I'm thinking this guy's going to win his third major. My God, PGA coming up next. But he bogeyed the road hole, had the birdie 18, couldn't do that. And Zach Johnson ended up winning that in a playoff. But golf has taken me to some great spots around the world.
Let me ask you, why didn't you ever transition? Why didn't you ever transition into TV broadcasting?
I've done some TV. Did some work for Jefferson Pilot, Raycom, college games. It was just not. It wasn't my cup of tea. I am so much more comfortable on radio. Television, I'd get really nervous about the opening shot on screen. Okay, am I going to blow this? Am I going to say this right. And television is much more geared to the analyst than it is a play-by-play guy. The less you say as a play-by-play guy on television, the better I think you are. So it's always been radio, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. It's fun. It's fun to call, to try to be descriptive, to let fans visualize what you're telling them. And I'm fortunate that it's been 17 years since I called the Panther games. But at the golf tournament here last week, people would come up to me and say, "Hey, man, we really miss you. You were great." And I think part of that's because I was the first voice of the team. And a lot of people still remember those first 10 years. And then we did go to a Super Bowl. But it's that cool feeling you get. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to be the voice of a franchise. And I've been fortunate enough to be the voice of two of them.
From that reel-to-reel tape recorder and doing high school basketball at Bishop Gibbons in the gymnasium, did you ever think in your wildest dreams this is going to take you on this wonderful and woolly path?
I was hoping. I had no idea. I never knew, Ed, what sport I was going to get into to call games. I like baseball. Marietta College had a great baseball team, as I said before, and we traveled with them. They would play in the NCAA tournament, Division III tournament. And I did a lot of baseball, and I enjoyed baseball. Baseball is more storytelling, BS, and filling in the blanks between pitches. I thought maybe, could I ever be the voice of the Yankees? But I got into football just kind of happened that way. When I got to Mutual, Mutual became Westwood One in the late 80s. So that's how that happened. And, I got to be really good at calling college football, NFL games. And then you get to be the voice of a couple of NFL teams. So it just kind of happened. I've never done baseball since Ohio, doing college and high school games there. So, but it just happened. Football was and golf, who calls golf on radio? If you're applying for a job, Ed, and they're going, we need, it's not like you've called the local high school tournament last week on radio. Nobody calls golf. Nobody calls college golf on radio. I mean, you can see it on television, but who calls golf on the radio? So it was just one of these. I made a tape. The tour wanted to see how I sounded or hear how I sounded before they hired me. So I had to make up stuff. I'd be on my balcony. I'd go, and here's Rory McIlroy. He's got 15 feet for birdie here at 16. And then your voice raises as he makes the putt. So it was this tape I put together that I sent to them of what I would sound like if I was ever at a golf tournament. And it worked out because they hired me.
We've talked about several different topics, and thank you so much for sharing all these wonderful stories and anecdotes. What would you like to talk about that I didn't ask you so far? What have I missed?
I think you've covered it all. I'm my current thing is I'm working with Compass Media right now the last 2 years, and I do NFL and college basketball for them, some college football. I'm back with Westwood. Westwood used me for the NCAA basketball tournament in Indianapolis this year for the first week. So it's really interesting dealing with COVID. I've been lucky. We came back on the tour after they shut it down for a few months in June. And it was really strange calling golf shots and calling great putts with nobody cheering. It's just really weird. And then to go to football stadiums, and it varied over the course of the season. I was fortunate that we traveled because I know a lot of NFL play-by-play teams stayed at home. I think Murph was calling Bill's road games from the stadium in Orchard Park. We were fortunate that what I was doing, we were traveling. So I traveled to golf tournaments, did college football games. Seattle's a great place. I don't know if you've ever been there at that stadium, but it is electric with those fans. So here I'm calling Seahawks 49ers with nobody in the house. And it's just weird. It's just like really strange. They tried to pipe in crowd noise and stuff, but it didn't sound right. So that was kind of the thing over the last year that we had to deal with, which I hope we don't have to deal with anymore.
When the time comes, how do you want to be remembered by?
Oh, well, personally, Bill was a good husband, a good father. I'm proud of my two boys. My younger son's in broadcasting. He's here in Charlotte, works for the ESPN affiliate. He has done some play-by-play. He's been on like ESPN Plus because the Charlotte 49ers, the college here, UNC Charlotte, they started a football program a number of years ago, and he's been involved in that. And he does a talk show. And then my older son's still in Atlanta, and he got an engineering degree. I don't know how he was smart. He got that from his mom, not from me. I have 2 grandkids with him. So to answer your question, good husband, good father, good friend. I've tried to help a lot of people in the broadcasting business, try to, give them advice, land jobs. I think that's about it. Just a good guy. I hope I've lived up to that. I don't know if I've been the greatest Catholic in the world. I haven't been to church in a while, but I still remember I wouldn't trade St. Francis in grammar school or Gibbons the 4 years there with anything. Those were cool times, and it got better in college. I joined a fraternity. I became the president of a fraternity, and college was great. So I've been blessed in my life to meet the people I've met, to have the jobs that I've had, and hopefully I'm 68 now, so hopefully we can keep it going here for a few more years. I can't imagine retiring. Like, what am I going to do when I retire? Well, I want to go to golf tournaments. I want to go to football games. Well, let's get paid. Let's go to these things and get paid.
Bill Rosinski, this has been a pleasure today on the North Tonawanda Football Hall of Fame YouTube channel. I wish you well. I wish you continued health and good success. And I want to thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for joining me today. Thank you, Bill.
Ed, my pleasure. Anytime.